Hi, and welcome to Shrinks on the Street. Today we have an interview with a very knowledgeable person in the area of domestic violence, Lisa Twerski. I am your host, M. Gary Neuman, with my wise co-host and daughter, Esther Neuman. Go to NeumanMethod.com, Neuman Method.com. Find out more about our work with Oprah, New York Times bestselling work, and other projects we have to offer the community. So let me just get you introduced to Lisa Twerski. She's a licensed clinical social worker. She's been working with domestic violence victims for over 30 years.
Wow.
So she really is the expert in this field. And I think we did this because it's important. Everyone thinks it's somebody else, but everybody knows somebody, I bet, who is involved in domestic violence, but you just may not even realize it. She lectures internationally, maintains a private practice in Brooklyn. She's published a book that's entitled, "I'm So Confused, Am I Being Abused? Guidance for the Orthodox Spouse and Those Who Are Trying to Help." More recently, she co-founded Kesher, which is an organization dedicated to relationships, and she's currently providing an 8-week course for married couples intended not just to inform, I like this, but to transform how couples relate to each other.
That.
And everybody can use that. I always joke, Esther and I always joke when I do marriage talks, in the front, there's always this elderly couple that's been married like 60 years, and I always look at them and say, "What are you doing here?" And they say, "No, the reason we have a good marriage is because we come to these classes." So, you should continue to educate yourself with these great programs. Thank you very, very much, Lisa, for being here with us today.
Thank you.
So I think
I'm really excited to be here,
yes.
actually.
So I think our first question, domestic violence, it is such a serious topic. And we just wanted to know, from your perspective, what is the number one thing that people need to know about domestic violence from your perspective?
I think the number one thing is that if you are anywhere, not that it is everywhere, but that it shows up in all parts of society. It shows up in wealthy couples, it shows up in underprivileged, it shows up in highly educated people, it shows up in undereducated people, it shows up in every religion, it shows up across the board. And that when somebody is in a category of class or privilege, thinking, oh, what I'm experiencing or what I'm suspecting with my friend or child or relative, it can't be that because we're too religious or we're too wealthy or we're too educated or that's just a myth. It shows up everywhere, unfortunately. Nobody's immune. And if there's something going on that's off, that feels off, it might be, it might not be. Certainly, regardless, if couple or one or the other person in a marriage is suffering and in pain, they should reach out for help. Their friend who's noticing something or they who noticing something, it doesn't have to all be on their shoulders how to fix it, but it shouldn't be sort of, pushed aside. It's probably not such a big deal. If it's a big deal to the person, let them go and see what the big deal is about, because the layperson isn't going to know exactly the nuances or what to do to intervene if this is domestic violence, but it shouldn't be pushed to the side if somebody's in pain. Let them go and get help and see what's going on.
So what is the layperson, what is the mistake that they make typically?
I would say that this mistake is made across the board. It's lay people, it's therapists, it's the mistake, and I don't know if it's a mistake or it's a miss in how they respond. Meaning this, in our work in the field of psychology, there's been a lot of talk about neuropsychology and how we understand the body-mind connection more recently. And a lot of the work in trauma and understanding and healing and work in trauma has been centered around the idea that we respond to trauma with a fight-flight response. And you're wondering, what does this have to do with anything? And what does this have to do with the friend or family member or therapist of the person who's being abused? And one of the things that I've noticed is that it's not just the person who's being abused that's going to have a fight, flight, trauma response, but when we, the therapist, or we, the family member, or we, the friend, are faced with somebody who's coming and telling us that they're being abused, let's say it's outright, it's overt, I'm being abused, we ourselves experience a threat response. We feel threatened by the fact that there's this ongoing threat in the person I am worried about. I'm worried about as their therapist, I'm worried about as their friend, I'm worried about as their family member. We experience threat. I got to do something. I have to try and this, I have to fight it, or I have to help them run away from it, or I run away from it. We experience our own threat response, and what the mistake then that happens as a result of that is that we look to get over involved, and we stop listening to the person. Because I myself am feeling threatened, I want to yank you and schlep you out of that marriage, or I want to go and I'm going to confront the guy myself, or whatever the response is, we stop listening to the person who's being abused. And when we stop listening, it isn't really, and try and take over, it isn't experienced that much differently than being abused in the first place. This person wants to take over my life and push me around and tell me what to do. And now my friend or therapist who's trying to help wants to push me around.
Right.
And
so
they'll
see, right. So the victim, let's say, and I hate using the word victim, but the person in this situation is seeing the helper, the person who's trying to get them out, as an abuser in a convoluted way, because they're feeling the same feelings of abuse.
Well, they might feel it on some level, it might be experienced in a caretaking way, but they can't utilize it any differently, because I know what I can do and I know what I'm not yet ready to do, or I know what's safe to do or what's not yet safe to do. I need you to help support me addressing that, figuring out how to do something else if I want to, but can't see. But I don't need you taking over my life.
Right. So it's important for the recipient of the domestic violence, for them to be empowered to be able to make these moves on their own. Is that what you're
exactly
right?
Because exactly. I think you're absolutely correct. I think the average person, therapist included, they think, let's take over.
Right. Let's get like they're too vulnerable. We have to get her or him out of it. Right.
Pull and then we'll work on the therapy and why and whatever.
But you're saying that in your experience, that's not necessarily the best way to go about it. And I do think a lot of family members, I think one of the questions, and I did work in domestic violence for a bit. I worked in a clinic for a bit. So it was very interesting, because here the family members want to help, and the person doesn't want to leave the situation. I think that's the biggest struggle, and I don't know if you've seen that, but where family members are like, my child, my sister, my brother, whatever, is being abused, and my mother, and they won't leave, and they won't go, and they won't let us help, and it drives the family member crazy. And so I think this is a very important topic for people, how to best maneuver that, how to help the person in that situation.
Well, we have to redefine help and not define it as I'm getting you out, right? The opposite of being abused isn't being taken over with kindness, it's being respected, right? The opposite of being abused is being respected. Now, a lot of people do struggle, as you're saying, Esther, a lot of people do struggle with how do you respect the choice to stay? What do you mean I have to respect her choice to stay? Well, yeah. And that's the triggering moment in the helper, in the family member, sometimes in the therapist. What do you mean you're asking me to respect her choice to stay?
So let me unpack this with you for a second, because being comfortable with the choice for a victim of domestic violence to stay in that situation, if it's my daughter or son, in some cases, right, men also are abused, or my sister, and I think that they're being physically abused, okay? Because we'll talk later about the different types of abuse. There's verbal abuse and sexual abuse, different types of abuse. But let's say she's being physically abused. And let's say there's children involved. And now, if they're being physically abused, I know that's a different story. That then you
Right, but we're just
you would tell me that.
witnessing
But
it.
we're just witnessing it. Okay. So I don't know. I mean, to say to me, well, talk sense to the person, respect what they're saying. But if they don't want to leave, whether for a day or a month or a year, you need to respect that. Is that what I, the helper, the family member, am supposed to do if I can't cajole them into leaving?
Right. So a couple of different things. I definitely wouldn't say that I'm expecting anyone to be comfortable with respecting their choice.
Okay,
It's
I
going to be
It's a good
appreciate that.
distinction, right?
uncomfortable.
I'm
Right? A lot
uncomfortable
of
just
times people
imagining
wanna-
it.
Right. A lot of
Your
times
fight or
people
flight
wanna-
response is like,
I'm about to leave, Lisa.
Right. If it's comfortable, then it's good, and if it's uncomfortable, then it's bad. But that doesn't work, right? You're going to be uncomfortable, period. But now we need to unpack it further and say, okay, how do I know what's going on, and what are my real options? So in scenario A, the children, it's your child, and so these are your grandchildren, and they're coming and they're telling you what's going on. Now, you have to think very carefully about the approach you want to have with your child, because I could tell you of many scenarios where that sort of aggressive, you got to get out of this is horrible and terrible, what are you doing, has not helped, and all it has done is driven the system underground. Families have moved away. They've alienated their grandchildren from the grandparents. If the system or the person isn't ready for the support to leave, and you come on too strong, you can make it worse.
So
Important
take
to
a step
know.
back and analyze, look at the situation and before jumping into it, and see the possible outcomes of your action.
And if you're worried, or if you've tried something and it has seemed to make things that has actually made the system go more out of control, instead of actually creating a relationship with that child who is now coming to you, let's say, or a friend, you want to really take a step back from that and go talk to somebody who understands these issues. There isn't one formula for every parent or every sister or every child, adult child, who has somebody in their life who's being abused, who wants to be helpful and wants to make sure not to misstep. So ask somebody. So that's one piece. The other piece to understand, one thing that I will tell often, I find myself telling friends, family members who in scenario B, the reason they know is because the person is coming to them themselves, is that you don't want to become so active that the person is relieved of their distress about what's happening. Okay, because very often the dynamic that'll happen is that there's somebody being abused, they come and they tell you, you get all of the emotional responsibility. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it, that's so terrible, that's so horrible. And then they sort of calm down and they keep going, and the person is left frustrated. What do you mean you're planning a vacation? Didn't you just come to me with bruises? Like, I don't get it. And I'll often use the analogy of a book I once read. It was a novel about a hostage negotiator who was talking about when you are negotiating with a kidnapper, and they say, I want this, and I think I'm just gonna kill the 5-year-old. He's a real brat. You can't get hysterical. They're looking for power, and if you get no, don't do that. If you get hysterical, they're going to find power in that, and they're going to keep provoking you. You can't say nothing. That would be morally repugnant. You have to keep it on. I don't want you to do that. It's a statement. It's an I statement. It's very clear, and it doesn't get emotional. This is similar. When a friend or family member is come to and said, my husband does this or my wife does this, and you say, I wouldn't be able to tolerate that. I don't think that, that's good for children. I don't think that that's impacting the children well, or I don't think this is what marriage is about. And you don't take the emotional, I'm going to get you to do something, I'm going to become hysterical. You get to now be sort of the other end of the argument. It's not so bad. The kids don't really know that. They get to talk out all of the other side of the argument because I have jumped on this is the worst thing on the planet. If I don't take that side and I just say, I don't think this is okay. I would not be able to tolerate this. I don't see it as marriage. All of a sudden there's nowhere to go. And the effect of that, where the person really can kind of take in, this isn't okay. There's someone there who will be there with me through it. That's a much more universally okay. That's not going to mess anything up.
So almost a statement of fact and not getting emotionally charged about the scenario, even though you want to, you go and get emotionally charged with someone else, but with the person,
exactly.
You just calm, direct.
Go get emotionally charged with somebody else.
Right.
Exactly.
But I love your idea of
emotionally charged here.
Yeah.
Right. I love the idea also
one way or the other.
of staying calm and also using I messages.
Yeah.
Because the
really
idea
good.
of how could you stay,
right, blaming, then that pushes blame.
Then it is it's not abuse, but then now you've put more onto the person.
Right. And this goes into, the person who's in these situations. Lisa, have you found, because in a way, not that they're looking to be blamed, but they're in a situation where the abuser is blaming them, putting things on them, and so they're expecting. I think there's like an expectancy that the world will do that to them. So if they go to their friend or the loved one and they're like, "Well, how could you stay in there?" They're expecting that. That just kind of feeds into this abusive dynamic.
I think it's a good point. I would say it a little differently in terms of why it's not a good idea, but along exactly these lines, which is that if my friend is also going to have this response to me, or my mother or father or sister is also going to have this response to me, so I might as well just stay with him. At least that way I'm not divorced. Like, I'm not blamed and divorced if I stay with him. If I leave, then maybe I'm blamed and divorced.
Right. Right. So if you use the I message, it has nothing to do with the person who's in the situation. It's, I would not be able to handle this. I don't think that's a great idea.
If there's anything I want, if there's anything I could do to help, good. I don't think to me, this is not marriage.
Yeah. So when I talk to people who are dating or looking to date, and there's always, this, how do people end up? Everyone's always curious. How do you end up in an abusive situation? And have you found that there's a common denominator where the child was, with controlling parents or
that's the one everybody goes to, right? Controlling parents, disconnected parents.
Yeah. You're it's always the parents. Your parents must be. And I don't know if have you seen. What have you seen?
Well, I think that there's a range, and I don't think it's one thing. And I think that very often, depending on, what the courtship is like, it's not so obvious. What somebody will do and experience in marriage is not necessarily present in the dating situation. So for a lot of people, they saw things that they didn't know how to interpret or digest, that maybe in hindsight they're going, oh,
there it is.
That was That was, the foreshadowing to that. But the foreshadowing was not horrendous like the actual storyline that the marriage becomes. So a lot of times it's that they don't know. Maybe there is something in their family or childhood that makes even the smaller things not feel as bad. But a lot of times it's just plain, it was a once or twice thing that made me uncomfortable. So why would I dump everything else that I liked? Or
right. So it's a good point. So you're saying, and I have seen this where abusers in the dating, because you always go back to, what was happening in dating? How could you not have seen it? And I find that the abuser tests out the person in a way. Like they'll do things that are slightly controlling, but that they can, like you were saying, they'll justify, or that the person who's in the relationship will go, oh, well, it's not so bad. He's really such a nice guy. He changed my wedding date, 3 days 3 times, but that's not such a big deal, or he was very insistent that I go with him to a baseball game, even though I hate baseball, or I don't know, whatever. That's so silly.
Right.
I'm trying to think of examples that are charged. They're not coming to me right now, but basically
he got angry. He got very angry.
Oh, he
yelled
got
at
angry.
Me.
Right. Yeah.
He screamed at me.
Or he got angry at me about something. Right. Oh, but normally he's so calm and nice, and then he apologized to me, so it was all okay. And so I find, so I don't know if you see where the abuser will test it out, because I people are nervous that they'll end up in these situations. So you were saying the intuition, that there's something inside the person who says, well, there were these little things, but I ignored them. Is that kind of that I put them aside?
Well, I didn't know how to interpret them. Just going back to your point, it's very hard to know, is it a testing, or is it that in the dating, I don't feel the same entitlement to control and dominate as I eventually do when we, are married or have a child together, that there is a incrementally, for many abusers, what we see is that there's this incremental increase in how much control they presume they are entitled to based on how much you belong to me, so to speak. So, when we're dating, it's maybe not as bad because you don't yet belong to me in the same way. And when we're engaged, I might see an increase, but now we're already engaged. Do I break an engagement? He was so nice in the dating. Now, and then you belong to me more when we're married.
Right. There are little signs.
Little signs, but I think what Lisa's point to me is it's hard to interpret, because there are people who get angry and yell, and
but they're not
they
abusers.
never
Right.
they're never
They're
involved in domestic violence.
Right.
In other words, it's hard to say, oh, that person lost his temper. Oh, he's going to be involved in domestic violence. There's plenty of people who lose their temper and are not. So I guess it's hard to find.
I'm trying to find the thing, but
the commonality.
Right, but it sounds like there's not necessarily a commonality. It's more so it sounds like maybe the increase in control. Like I did read a study that women, when they're pregnant, domestic violence increases, and I have seen, unfortunately, the abuser will generally start attacking more or attack the stomach area when a woman is pregnant. And it's like, it's and that's when they get, I don't know if you've seen it, but I know they get very controlling at that point. Yep. When a woman's vulnerable.
Birth of the first child, all of a sudden this man that was a prince, maybe yes, maybe no, but basically nice guy, or I thought so, turned into
Is he feeling less in control, therefore he's asserting more control? Would you suggest that?
Sometimes again, it's hard to know, because you want to go ask the man who's doing this, if it's a man or woman, are you going to rely on what they say?
Right.
I understand.
To some degree. But is it that I feel less in control because your attention is diverted to the baby, or is it that I feel more control because where are you going? Maybe sometimes like this, sometimes like that. I don't know. But in the dating process, it's also, can I say something and is it taken seriously? Or when I say something, it's ignored, or it's poo-pooed, or it's the same thing the next time around. If I raise something and say I'm uncomfortable with it, what happens? Where does that go?
That's a very good point.
It's a good point. I think if you're dismissed, I think there are people who get mad and they lose their temper, but there's always a difference in if they begin to attack and be mean or dismiss the other person's feelings or thoughts. I think there's a very fine turn, a difference between a person who would just, be moody, get upset in more of the normal continuum, and a person who is comfortable saying, you're bad, you're lazy, start saying things or not hearing you at all, like Lisa's saying, whatever you want to do, it's not even on the radar. So it's the feeling of
the person, is how the person, how the potentially abusive person makes you feel.
Correct. And if they're mean, I guess there's a difference between being mean and being loud or being in a bad mood.
Mean can be nasty overtly, or mean can be, you told me you didn't like something, I don't call you for 3 days.
Right.
There's consequences.
It can be passive,
to
you're saying, as well.
Asserting myself. In marriage, that's very much the pattern.
Oh, that's a good idea. I like that line. There's consequences to me asserting myself.
Right. Right.
That's a
to
very
being a
good line.
That's a good point.
To
Right.
the abused, to the victim. In other words,
Right.
that's what's going to happen. The other person's making you feel that there's consequences to you asserting yourself. I think that's a nice package when you're dating or when you're in marriage.
Right. Early on in marriage, like if I'm not allowed to raise a voice, to have a voice, then that's not good.
Right.
You know, or there are consequences.
And the reason that the word consequences is so important is because the consequences can be anything. People think of domestic violence in terms of violent consequences. And if there isn't physical violence, oh, we're not talking about domestic violence. But there's a lot of consequences that can be asserted.
Talk about other things.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people do, you're right, see domestic violence as physical abuse. And I have met women who weren't physically abused, so they didn't think they were in a domestic violence situation until they came to therapy and were like, oh, wait, he cut up my credit cards and threw them out the window. Wait, that's abuse.
So how do you refer to abuse? Because the name of your book in the title is Am I Being Abused? Right? So obviously you're dealing with a population and you're making your point that people don't even realize it's going on. So what should people be looking out for beyond physical abuse?
Well, that's why I started when you said if there's one thing people should know, is that if you're in pain and you're suffering and your marriage is not a source of support and comfort and rejuvenation, you should reach out and figure out what's going on. And that doesn't mean that it's always going to be abuse. You know, it could be something else. There could be some other dysfunction or mismatch or need for calibration or working through some sort of couples work. That's where Kesher came in, is that there's so much, even from the place of we both have the right attitude about what marriage is, people can still make each other incredibly miserable, even when they both think that marriage is about taking care of the other. They don't know how, they don't know when, they don't know where, they don't know. There's a lot of things. So if you're in pain or suffering, reach out and try and get some help and figure it out. If it's abuse, there will be one kind of, intervention. And if it's really about a couple's dynamic, there's another intervention. And if it's really individual, there are people who are miserable in marriage, but whatever's going on is their issue. Reach out. That's the thing. It's beyond the scope of this to go through the whole what is domestic violence and the assessing but what does it hurt to call a hotline or to call for one session or to call a clinic?
Right. Is there, Lisa, is there a short checklist? Because the issue you're talking about is everybody, they come to us and they do ask, like, we're supposed to sacrifice for our spouse. So it becomes very sticky. Where's the, over-sacrifice? Like, we're never doing anything I'm doing, but we're supposed to be supporting our spouse versus it's getting like I'm losing my identity. That's how I try to explain it to people. I say, we can make lots of changes, but all those changes are supposed to help the spouse, but it's also supposed to make us better people. When we start to see us feeling like we're losing ourselves, that's a part where you really need therapy. I don't know if it's abuse, but is there kind of a short checklist that you say to somebody to think at home as they're hearing or watching this? If they want to know, am I being abused? Is that abuse? Or is it just that I'm got to give more, sacrifice? This is what marriage is. Is there a short checklist for that?
Well, let's back up to healthy. I always say, on one foot, what is a healthy marriage? A healthy marriage is one where I think it's my responsibility to take care of you emotionally, spiritually, physically, psychologically. My job is to take care of you. Doesn't mean I never think about myself, but that's my job. And that's your job. And so we both get given to from a giving position. When somebody wakes up every morning and feels like I'm trying to give to you, I don't feel at all given to, because I say to myself, whether literally or actually say, what else can I do? And the other person says, more, 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 more. And there doesn't seem to be a focus back. That's a significant problem. That's a significant problem to go seek help for. And
so a complete imbalance is the point. A complete imbalance.
balance is definitely reason to go get help. If you feel like you and your spouse are both trying, but it's not going, and you're both miserable, that's also a reason to go get help. You might not need as much help. You just need to learn each other a little bit better. And that might be sort of shorter help. But certainly if I feel like like you're saying, I'm losing myself, I can never give enough, and I don't see any effort, intent, interest, presumption that it has to go the other way, we're probably talking about not an ignoring, like just not up for it, not interested, not looking to, but really looking to get more. It's not enough. You aren't thinking about me enough. You aren't doing enough. It isn't enough. It isn't enough. And there's nothing about how you're going to take care of me. We're probably drifting into
a dangerous area. Understood.
A dangerous area. Certainly an area you're not going to be able to navigate and change by yourself.
Got it. Could you tell us what constitutes verbal abuse to you?
Well, for somebody that works with domestic violence, it's seen as a constellation. It's a thing. It's not separate things. The separate things that you're talking about, the emotional abuse, the name calling, putting them down, undermining, maybe gaslighting, or the financial abuse, separating them from money and not allowing them to get a job, sabotaging their job maybe, the sexual abuse, being sexually aggressive, etc. All of these kind of things are seen as tactics, which are part of the constellation of domestic abuse, where the goal and the presumption is that I will gain and maintain power and control over you. I will utilize these tactics to gain and maintain that power because I feel entitled to that power. But they're sort of tactics that are part of the whole when you're talking about domestic abuse. Could somebody be verbally abusive and we're not talking about domestic abuse? Yes, people are verbally abusive in dysfunctional marriages, in marriages where maybe there is, a mental illness of some sort. So when you talk about it separate, people call each other names. It doesn't necessarily mean because somebody's being called names that we're talking about domestic abuse. Domestic abuse is a specific or intimate partner violence, which is, I think, the correct term these days, is a specific phenomenon that is at its core about power and control.
I see. So in other words, you can't split them. And if you're talking about verbal abuse, chances are there's other issues of power and control that are going on that are beyond that. So it's not simply, oh, he called me a bad name or he talks down to me and it stays there and that's the only issue. Usually it's part of a bigger picture.
Well, I'm saying is that if it does stay there, then we're not probably talking about intimate partner violence or domestic abuse, then we're talking about something else.
Right, which is definitely a problem. I'm not suggesting that's not, it's I'm not saying it's not bad. It needs help. It needs attention. Do you find that
it probably needs something else? In domestic violence, in a true domestic violence case, you would not make a referral for couples work. It's too dangerous. But if somebody is, they don't know how to fight and they're fighting in ways that are damaging to one, but we don't hear a pattern of control, you might make a referral for couples counseling. So it matters in terms of the intervention, what's safe, what's not safe. That's why it's important. It's all hurtful, but it depends.
Right, but the controlling behavior is a very, it seems like.
Control, consequences, those are the things that you're looking for, or that are the constants in what we're talking about.
Well, we're going to take a break and have to stop over here. This is going to be part 1 of the talking to Lisa Twerski and her wisdom in the area of domestic violence. And we are going to come back next week with part 2.
And some really good stuff there, about helping kids in these situations.
Yes.
And
really learning what perhaps makes a person who is involved in domestic violence, both from the person who is the perpetrator and the victim. We're going to be talking about that coming up. So we look forward to seeing you for part 2.
To hear part 2 and even more great topics, check us out at Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That's Shrinks on the Street. Be sure to subscribe to stay informed of our latest content.